First of all, I want to thank the organizers for making the effort and bringing me over here. It was a great occasion to meet old friends, to meet friends I only knew from the emails and the internet, and new friends. And so far, as one would have expected it, it proves to be an excellent and an intriguing project. And I do hope it will come out as a book eventually, because I think that this is a very significant and substantial contribution to the scholarly work on Palestine and the Palestinians. What I will try and do very briefly is to look at Falastin, the newspaper, as an actor on the ground, not so much as a newspaper, but far more as a relatively calm space in a very tense Palestine to try and evaluate the reality around it. Very much like the family doctor of previous years, as you would remember before the professionalization of medicine. The family doctor was someone who knew about everything. And then medicine was professionalized, and the family doctor is the one who doesn't know anything about anything anymore. I'm afraid newspapers have gone this way without offending any of our journalist friends here too much. Falastin, in this respect, was not just a medium which reported about reality, it was also a medium that tried to analyze the reality. So whether it forged or did not forge a national identity, whether it played or didn't play an important role in the politics of the day, it definitely made the most intensive effort in understanding the reality and the unfolding reality. Maybe next to some independent, educated people who were not connected to the newspapers, but there was no Palestinian university and there were no proper academic research centers, so the newspaper was actually fulfilling the role academics, in a way, should and would play later on. So I'm looking at the newspaper as, if you want, a professional, with limitation, a professional observer on the reality on Palestine in general, but in particular on how it viewed, how it analyzed Zionism. And what was the prescription? What was its ideas of how to confront Zionism? Were they that different from what the political leadership or milieu suggested, or was it very much in line with that perception? And what, more importantly, what can we learn from its success or failure? A few points come out. Some of them, I think, are a bit contrary to what some sort of more popular historical collective has about educated Palestinian responses to Zionism. The first point, which at least for me was quite amazing, is how very early on those who write in the newspaper recognize Zionism beyond its actual reality. There is a lot about the potential of Zionism. And in fact, that was a trick about Zionism. If you took the very poor settlers who came in the first two waves of immigration, if you look at their numbers, if you looked at their economic capacity, if you look at their military capabilities, you would not think that they constituted a genuine existential threat. So to write even before 1914 that this group has a potential to pose an existential danger is quite impressive. And I'm not saying this in hindsight, I'm saying it based on what they have written about Zionism. And we have to understand as historians that what they saw in front of them was not very dangerous by itself. You had to analyze it in order to understand that it posed a danger. So that's one point, which is quite important. Neither, and that's another interesting issue, there is no demonization of the settlers. They are not taken out of proportion despite of the potential danger that they constitute. And they are not portrayed in any way that is not loyal to the way that they acted on the ground, including, by the way, the positive potential contribution that they could have made to Palestine. For instance, when they start bringing new agricultural technology, when they do tackle the question of arid land in some parts of Palestine, which were not inhabited before, and they attempt to settle in areas which were considered unsettleable before. And the newspaper talks about it without forgetting the overall context in which it wants to analyze Zionism and present Zionism. There is also an interesting kind of pedantic approach to the various contexts in which the political reality unfolds, whether it is the late Ottoman reality or the new mandatory reality. So the connection between Ottoman or British policy to the potential success or failure of Zionism is also noticed. So I think anyone who would write in a popular history book that the Palestinian educated group, whatever one means by that, has ignored Zionism, I think is writing a historical factual mistake. Through the newspapers, not only Palestine, one can see that the urban educated elite knew it was facing something which was far larger than what it seemed. I think it would be unfair to say that they ignored the danger. So in a way, one should say they should not have been surprised, and they were totally surprised, when the catastrophe occurred in 1948. So why? If the analysis in a way was right, if the danger was there, where is the disconnection between the analysis and the prognosis? I'm very telegraphic, I'm sorry, because I have this 15 minutes, but I will be very happy to expand on this. When you look at the analysis, you can see that there is failure to analyze Zionism in two areas, which I think is very important because I feel this failure continues today. I think this is one thing that is very difficult, I think, for Palestinian, for anyone who tries to decipher Zionism to cross this barrier. Because there is this inbuilt paradox about Zionism. On the one hand, it's a very simplistic notion. It's brutally simplistic in what he wanted to achieve, and it's brutally simplistic sometimes in the way that it achieves what he wants to achieve. On the other hand, there are layers and layers of fabrication and manipulation that somehow don't go together with simplicity. And when you are able to understand that the two can go hand in hand, I think you begin to understand, not Zionism as a whole, Zionism as a whole is far more complex, but the Zionist and later on Israeli attitude and strategy and vision towards the local indigenous people of Palestine. The first, I will talk about two areas and then I'll stop because we want to stop after 15 minutes. One is that the basic Zionist strategy, as Falastin and those who wrote there understand it, that the basic policy is to purchase land. That you have to fail the Zionist project of land purchase, and then you sort of took the heart out of the beast, as one of the newspapers put it. That if the Zionist movement would be able to purchase land, it would have the economic and political ability to undermine the Palestinians in Palestine. That's the first. This point is repeated again and again and again. And it's so interesting when you read Palestinian historiography, even today, there is a sense of failure in stopping the Zionist land purchase. But this is not true historically. The Palestinian movement succeeded in stopping the Zionist movement from purchasing land in Palestine. Rewrite your history books. The Palestinian national movement succeeded, I repeat it, even if it's 16 minutes, in preventing the Zionist movement from purchasing land. This is why the Zionist movement had 7% of the land in Palestine. Compared to the 100% it wanted, even a banker will tell you it's a failure. 7% of the 100,000 is a total failure. So the analysis was wrong. The problem with Zionism, or rather the danger incurred in Zionism, was not the land purchase. But God knows how many words were spelled over the issue of land in Palestine and also in the discourse of the Palestinian politicians. And if it reminds you of something today, I think it should remind you of something today about the connection between land and survival, between space and survival. The reason that this analysis was wrong was that there was a gap between the facade of Zionism, as understood, by the way, by the British and by many of the members of the Jewish community themselves. The facade of a European, democratic, at times socialist movement that is trying to build a European enclave which is democratic, yes, racist in the sense that it wants to be exclusive Jewish, but nonetheless, if you want a political science model, a Herrenvolk democracy, one that would keep a democratic mechanism when it makes decisions. So the land issue was publicly discussed by Hebrew newspapers as well. The land issue seemed to be the more important issue. How do we buy land? What do we do with Palestinians who do not want to sell us lands? What do we do with land that belongs to absentee landlords? And we have to evict the Palestinians, right? Whereas this was not the main issue in about the midway of the mandatory period. In the mid-1920s, and much more so in the early 1930s, when David Ben-Gurion becomes the chief policymaker of Zionism. The main topic, which is not discussed through any democratic organization or mechanism, is the fate of the Palestinian native population. Not the land issue, but the people's issue. And you cannot discuss the people issues openly. You cannot bring to the major open democratic forums of the Zionist movement the question of transfer, the question of ethnic cleansing. For this to be formulated, to this for being strategized, you need a Kabbalistic approach. You need a small group of people that meets regularly or irregularly, that doesn't hold minutes, that tries very carefully, even it has talking to itself in an encrypted discourse, to make sure that this is being kept behind walls. So even if the newspaper and the journalists were of the highest quality, and they were normal, they would not have been able, to my mind, to decipher this, nor could they have even brought themselves to regard Zionism as something which was worse than neoclassical colonialist case studies. Jews in Europe could not have thought that Nazism could have been such an aberration of the history of anti-Semitism. The indigenous population in Native America and Native Australia could have not known that colonialism would end in genocide. Ethnic cleansing, as I would call it later, it's not the term that was used, of course. Transfer, by the way, forced transfer was used very widely, was not considered to be the main strategy of Zionism, not by the people of Palestine. Yes, there is, in the Palestinian papers, a hint that if the Palestinian community would be inactive, disunited, unaware of the politics, Zionism would take over Palestine. But there's no doomsday scenario which says, what does it mean that Palestine would be taken over by the Zionist movement? Would it mean that you'll have an Ottoman rule, British rule, and a Zionist rule? What would it mean? And it meant something, of course, worse, as you know, than a rule. So that was the one element, and I'm finishing with the second element. The first element, therefore, was the element of understanding the nature, or rather the gap between what Zionism looked like and the way policy was formulated and decisions taken when it really related to the most existential issue, the issue of survival on the land, not the issue of losing land or losing jobs or losing the political control. The second missing is I call it the misunderstanding of how to connect the various elements of the Zionist strategy. The newspaper understandably believed that the Zionist strategy is connected to immigration, that you need more land because you need to host more Jewish immigrants, or you need more Jewish immigrants and therefore you need more land. But again, history shows us that this was not the case. When the Zionist leadership decided to fully and ethnically cleanse Palestine, it already knew that there was no chance for massive Jewish immigration into Palestine. It was 1/3 of the population in Palestine. It did not rely on Jewish immigration for survival. It relied on the depopulation of Palestine to survival. And I reread the analysis in Falastin. It's very interesting. They quote Zionist liberal thinkers who didn't understand how far people like Ben-Gurion would go. This is why Ben-Gurion would never consult these people about ethnic cleansing. In other words, Palestine reflects the soft image, external and internal image of Zionism that liberal Zionists hoped Zionism would be all about. And I will finish with that. Namely, that you would like to believe that only if it is possible, you'll create a Jewish state. Namely, only if Palestinians would sell you land, and only if enough Jews would arrive, then there is a hope for a viable, sustainable Jewish state. This has never entered the psyche and mindset of David Ben-Gurion. His psyche and mindset went the other way around, he said. Only after you have a large chunk of Palestine, hopefully all of Palestine, totally de-Arabized, then people would come. Then you have a chance for a vital state. I don't have time, this is the third part, and if you ask me about it. A similar thing happened in 1967. I think we are still fooled by a similar gap between the face that Israel shows us of a society debating the fate of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip seriously, and a Kabbalistic policy that already in 1967, as in today, doesn't have a shade of innuendo of politics in it. It is determined Zionist leadership that still goes by the same formula. Israel is only sustainable in a de-Arabized, depopulated Palestine. All the rest are histrionics that have mesmerized enough people, unfortunately, for too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilan, for your excellent comments. You are not only a first-rate historian,